Hi, everyone. It's Friday, and as I mentioned previously, that my brother is going to be writing every Friday, or writing throughout the week, and sending it to me on Friday. And what he wrote is a little long, but I'm sure by the end of it, we will wish it was longer. I haven't read through it yet. I'm going to read through it here, and then I will also go ahead and post. Post the text as well if you want to read it yourself. I don't know if I'll do that each week, but I'm definitely going to do it the first week here. And so yeah, let's see how this dry read goes. It was another ordinary morning in a long series of ordinary mornings in the ordinary life of Travis Brighton. Even the day was the relatively dull number of the 23rd, and September was notably void of any interesting events as far as he knew. He was woken up by the calls of his mother warning him of the consequences of lying around, including, but not limited to, a cold breakfast. Throwing off his covers, Travis dropped his legs over the edge of the bed and sluggishly sat himself up in a hunched position. He yawned widely and rubbed at his face as if somehow the rearrangement of his features might help break out of his groggy state. It didn't. Blinking a pair of bleary blue eyes, he scanned the nearby floor for a crumpled mass of blue denim, and upon finding it, he grabbed them up and tugged at the one leg that was inside out. With that sorted, he pulled his jeans on as well as a pair of socks. By then, Travis was starting to find his bearings and felt he could even stand up. Another shout from his mom proved he could. Once fully dressed, which included a gray t-shirt and blue and white tennis shoes, he pounded loudly down the steps. Why do you always have to sound like a herd of elephants on the steps? The neighbors probably think we're running a shelter for zoo animals or something. Travis flashed a half smile and took his seat at the breakfast table. This was the usual routine between he and his mother every weekday morning. His dad never said anything about it because he never said anything at all. He was already on his way to work when Travis got up. These days, the boy hardly noticed. Salting the plate of scrambled eggs before him, Travis took a bite of toast. In just a few minutes, he had scarfed down everything before him and drained his glass of orange juice. "Thanks for breakfast," he said as he stood up from the table, then wiped away the orange mustache he had just grown and gave his mom a kiss on the way out. "Have a good day at school." He shrugged and slung his backpack over one shoulder. "Sure, Mom. You know how much I love it there," he returned dryly. Before he knew it, he was sitting in a seat all alone on the bus after being tripped by a bully, and then just as quick, it seemed he was walking into the school building. Everything just sort of blurred together, every day as it was almost exactly the same routine. None of it interested Travis, and so he no longer paid any attention. School was a difficult test of endurance for Travis. He had to persevere for hours at a time until he could finally get back home, where the routine was at least a bit more pleasant. He had no trouble understanding the work, but getting it done was another matter. It, like much of his day, was just so ordinary. The only class he struggled with was Japanese, and it made it the one he enjoyed the most. It provided a challenge. Due to the difficulty of it, he couldn't quite reach top grades, and all his other lessons he was docked for turning in work late. Travis was a straight B student, and that, among with his quieter demeanor and a lack of confidence, pushed him into near obscurity. Unfortunately, there was one who did always notice him, and they shared a number of classes together, including his favorite. Jeremy Lake was the same guy that enjoyed tripping Travis on the bus that morning, as well as many others. He also enjoyed handing out demeaning nicknames as if they were going out of style. The bus that morning was apparently not enough for Jeremy that day, and he decided to accidentally leave his foot in the aisle as Travis tried to reach his seat. Unlike most things in Travis's day-to-day, Jeremy seemed to randomly choose the days he pulled his maneuver as if he was lulling his prey into a false sense of safety. Working as well as always, Travis found himself falling straight for the floor, but when he hit the ground, he knew at once that something different had happened. Perhaps it was a testament to the amount of ordinary in the boy's life that it stood out to him. so much, but whatever the case may be, when he hit the ground, he did not hear the usual slap and thud that accompanied the shock of pain that went through his body upon contact. Instead, as if his fall had broken the sound barrier, a sudden onrush of sound came a moment later. But even that was not the expected noise. It was like the honking of multiple geese if those geese had been sick. And where was the laughter? People always laughed when he fell to the floor. Slowly, Travis got to his feet and collected his things. He felt like everyone was staring at him, and when he looked up to find his seat, he found that it was true. All eyes were on him, and they looked amazed? No, not amazed. They were fearful. The desk that had been nearest him and their occupants had all moved away. That odd noise he'd heard must have been them moving away from him. Too embarrassed and a little unsettled himself, Travis wasn't going to ask what was wrong, but more than one set of eyes had taken a harder edge to them. They hated him. One owner of such a pair of eyes opened his mouth to spit something, but before he could, the classroom door shut and a voice called out, "All right, quiet down, class." It was their teacher, Mr. Meyer. He was used to having to settle the class down when he came in, that he had just been running on autopilot. "We have plenty of—" He trailed off when he noticed his class was just sitting there, most of them staring at Travis. "What's going on here, Travis?" Turning around to face the front of the class, Travis saw all those eyes staring at him, and he felt more self-conscious in the moment than he had ever felt in his whole life. He squeaked out, but once he was facing Mr. Meyer. Clearing his throat, he tried again. I don't know, Mr. Meyer." By the look on the teacher's face, it did not appear as though he believed Travis. Finally, one of the other students in the classroom shouted out, unable to hold it back any longer. "He's a freak!" Mr. Truman, we do not use that kind of talk." "But he's one of them. He's an alien." This claim took Mr. Meyer by surprise. He looked over at Travis and stared at him as if he had never seen anything like him before. The same kind of fear that were in his students' eyes now shone in his. Travis was just as shocked at the words spoken by Fred Truman. Even if he didn't like Travis, how could he go so far as to call him such a thing? It was crueler than he could ever imagined. It was crueler than he could have imagined anyone ever being. "I see," Mr. Meyer said finally. "Is this true, Mr. Brighton?" Travis was utterly confused. Shaking his head, he tried to find the words, but he was just too shocked by the accusation and the way everyone was staring at him still. "Yes, it is," came the shout of another student. Travis recognized him as one of the kids that always hung out with Jeremy Lake. They disliked one another on principle. "He tried to blast us all." Before Mr. Meyer could respond, Travis whipped around and had suddenly found his voice. "What? Blast them? How could he blast anyone? He simply fell to the floor." But to Travis's horror, Jeremy and his friend flinched back when he turned toward them. More than any of the staring or accusations that sent goosebumps up and down Travis's arms. His bully was now scared of him? What had Travis actually done, and how could he not know about it? "I'm not sure what has happened in here, but I think it might be best for you to go see the principal, Mr. Brighton." Travis almost protested, but what was he going to say? Besides, did he really want to stay in that room any longer? So he nodded and stared at the floor. He couldn't bring himself to look up at anyone now. He did not want to see all that fear anymore. "Mr. Truman, please escort Mr. Brighton to the principal's office." "Are you kidding? Who knows what he might do to me?" Fred was clearly terrified to be alone with Travis. He was going to use any trick he could to not be the one who had to go with the alien. "I really don't think you should be endangering your students like that." Mr. Meyer was stuck. Letting students wander the halls alone was against policy, but he seemed to think Fred had a point too. Right. Mr. Brighton, do you think you can find your way?" "I'll take him." There was a sudden flood of movement as everyone twisted in their seats to see who had spoken. Even Travis's curiosity was piqued enough to look up. It was Sarah Schneider, of all people. She was not part of the most popular crowd in school, but she was well liked and was definitely not friendless. Still, someone too above his own status at school to be noticed. Not that Travis really wanted to be noticed, especially if the way the class was acting was any indication of what it was like to be popular. You will, Miss Schneider. Mr. Myers sounded just as surprised as Travis felt. Of course, someone needs to go, right? Right? I can do it. The girl's words seemed so matter-of-fact that there was no note of nervousness or loathing in her voice. She genuinely sounded happy to help. Very well, Mr. Myers scribbled out a note and handed it to Sarah, and she got up and approached the teacher's desk. Taking the note from him, she turned to Travis, who was still standing halfway up an aisle. Well, come on, let's get going. Taking a couple of long blinks to sort himself out, Travis then nodded quickly. He slung his bag over his shoulder and followed Sarah out into the hall. He could feel the relief that began to sweep across the room as he drew closer to the door. And to be honest, he felt better too once the door closed behind him. He was now free of all their stares. Well, most of them. Sarah was watching him intently as he came out. A moment or three after the door closed, Sarah turned and stared down the hallway. Sarah turned and started down the hallway. Travis walked along a few steps behind. Noticing this, Sarah slowed down until they were walking beside each other instead. The walk started off quiet, and Travis could feel Sarah glancing over at him over and over again. He looked her way a couple of times, too, just as curious about her volunteering as she was likely about his, well, whatever it was that had gotten his classmates so riled up. Trying hard not to be bothered over her curiosity or the entire situation back in class, Travis started studying the walls and lockers they passed by. One of the lockers must have had some kind of toy or something in it because he saw flashes of colored lights flickering repeatedly. So how do you do that? Travis' brows furrowed as he looked over at Sarah. Do what? She stopped and folded her arms. Don't play dumb. She gestured down at Travis's feet. That. He couldn't explain it, but suddenly Travis felt nervous. He did not want to look at his feet, afraid they might have transformed into something hideous, or maybe they were floating off the ground or something. But all he saw were his tennis shoes. I really don't know what you're talking about. When he looked back, he could see that Sarah was clearly annoyed with him. The pair of them stared at one another, blinking for a minute. Throwing up her arms in surrender, Sarah went back to walking. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine, but there's no point in pretending anymore. We all saw what you did in class, and I was just And now you're doing it again! The girl stopped abruptly and immediately pointed at his feet again, causing Travis to stop and look too. He saw a flash from the locked-up toy for a moment, but otherwise nothing worth noting. Doing what? Sarah's face was illuminated in a red light for just a second, and then her eyes widened and mouth dropped. So it's not just you. That's so weird. At this point, Travis was growing irritable. The girl was making no sense, and it wasn't as if he didn't have enough going on with what the kids calling him an alien and being sent to the principal's office. Simply dealing with Jeremy was enough difficulty for a day. Would you stop that? I really don't have any idea. Travis began to trail off when he saw the reds and whites flashing across Sarah's face again. When he slowed down, he even noticed that the lights timed perfectly with each word he spoke, and then stopped when he stopped. Dread welled up inside him, and he simultaneously wanted to say something to see if it would happen again, and didn't, because he feared it would. It was strange, but Travis had been sure to see his own fears mirrored in Sarah's face, but he began to realize that hers was an expression of amazement. She wasn't scared at all. His next thought was that there was something very wrong about her. How could she not be scared? He was a freak. Breaking away, he said, I'm sorry, only to have 2 more flashes of light trigger. This sped up his retreat, and without looking, he felt himself slam into the lockers behind him, But something was wrong. The metallic bang that should have accompanied the action did not happen. Instead, there was a blast of light that illuminated the ceiling and floor all around him. Travis looked all around in panic and then back at Sarah, who was stunned and rooted to the spot where she stood in the hallway. All fear taking control, the boy made her run for it, with each footfall sending out another shock of light. That must have been why she kept bringing up my feet, he thought. There wasn't anything going off in a locker. It was my own feet, but how? Why do I keep firing off light like a firework? I'm not an alien, right? I would know if I was, wouldn't I? These thoughts and more accompanied the scared young man as he made it to the front doors of the school and burst silently through and out into the brilliant sunlight. No, not sunlight. It was too cloudy, and in a moment the light was gone. It had been him again. Travis just wanted to go home, hide in his room, and never come out again. But how would he get there and not be seen flashing across town? Even if he did find a way, what would happen when he got there? What would his parents think? His entire life had suddenly changed, and he was completely lost and alone. Running across the front lawn of the school, Travis was going to find somewhere to hide. He thought he heard Sarah's voice calling out behind him, but he ignored it and just ran as hard as he could. He kept on running until he couldn't anymore and tucked himself behind a dumpster located near the back door of a restaurant. He hugged his knees tight to his chest and shivered in the cool September air. Chapter 2. It was growing dark before Travis finally emerged from his hiding place. He'd nearly been spotted a couple of times when employees had come out to toss the trash, but he remained as still and silent as he could, and both times he was sure they had missed him. That, or they just didn't care enough to make anything of him being there. Still a little afraid to move, Travis slowly got to his feet and took one tentative step. Nothing happened. Travis let out a long sigh of relief and then started his long walk home. He didn't know what he would tell his parents when he got there, and he was sure he was going to be in some amount of trouble. But he wasn't causing random bursts of light anymore, and that was already a huge improvement from earlier. When he reached his neighborhood, Travis panicked when he saw flashes of red and blue. But then he spotted the cop car and realized it wasn't him this time. This relief was short-lived, however, when he noticed that the car was in front of his house. His parents must have called the cops when he didn't come home. Of course they did. He ran out of school and never came home. His stomach tightened as he started up the sidewalk that would lead him to the front door. He was going to be in so much trouble. Then he realized that his parents must know about the lights too. There was no way they hadn't heard from his teacher. For the briefest of moments, he thought about running away and hiding again. Before he could get too far, though, he heard the familiar voice of his mother. "Travis? Travis, thank goodness you're home." The boy slowly turned around. He feared what might have been coming. What he saw was a blur of tears and hair that was suddenly crushing the life out of him. Realizing the tendrils that were tightening ever more around him were his mother's arms, he relaxed a little. But then he saw the silhouette of his father in the doorway, the yellow light beyond appearing like an aura around his shadowy form. Travis's heart stopped and he felt his stomach drop. His mother might have been relieved at his return, but he was sure that retribution was just beyond the front step. When his mother finally released him, Travis took a deep breath to regain all that lost oxygen. Then he followed just behind his mother as she walked up to their home. "Thank you, officer. Sorry for all the trouble." "Thank you, officer. Sorry for all the trouble." It was his dad's voice. He sounded calm, but Travis was sure he detected a hard edge to the words. That just confirmed that he was undoubtedly in danger. "No problem. We're just happy he's safely back at home. These are dangerous times." The officer turned to see Travis and his mother approach. "You all right?" "Yes, officer," his mother replied. "I am now." The officer barely glanced over her as he seemed much more interested in Travis. Did he know? Had he heard what happened in school? Offering her a small nod and a kind smile, he returned his dark green eyes back to Travis. "And you, Mr. He gave a quick look at his notepad and apparently found the name quite fast as he finished immediately afterward. "Mr. Brighton, are you okay?" Then it occurred to Travis that maybe the officer hadn't heard anything about the school incident. Maybe he had always meant the question for him when his mother answered. After all, of course she was all right. Maybe he had just heard the same danger in his father's voice as Travis had. He felt some relief at this idea and made the officer's attention much less unsettling. Oh, yeah, I'm okay. The officer continued to watch Travis, perhaps looking for any signs of abuse. There wouldn't be any. His father had never beat him. He'd have to be around more to do that. You sure? The question didn't sound like disbelief or anything. Still, it seemed as if the officer was looking for something. Travis just gave a single nod in response. All right. Well, if anything changes, feel free to get a hold of me. Just call the station and ask for Officer Edwards. And I mean it, Mr. Brighton. I would be more than happy to help. There was a subtle shift in the man's expression. It was a serious and earnest expression. He really did want to help. But with what? He held Travis's gaze just a little longer and then straightened up and offered up that same kind smile that caused a few deeper wrinkles to appear at the edges of his eyes. Running a hand through his dark hair, he looked back over at the parents. Well then, you all have a good evening, all right? I'm happy you all are back together safe and sound. He dipped his chin in conclusion and then headed toward the street for his car. Thank you again, officer. The sound of Travis's mom calling out caused the officer to stop and look back. He gave a casual salute in acknowledgement. Just doing my job, ma'am. The officer continued his way toward the car while Travis was directed toward the door by his mother. He didn't dare look up at his father, who had stepped to the side to allow the other two inside. The lights of the cop car went out and he heard its engine start. The next sound was the front door clicking shut. A sudden chill ran down the boy's spine. Where were you? The deep rumble from his father caused Travis to bolt upright to the stairs to his room. The kid didn't know how to answer the question. The truth wasn't really interesting, and he doubted his father would believe he had just been hiding behind a restaurant. Travis knew he was taking too long and was sure a more forceful demand for answers was on its way. So when he heard his mother's voice, higher and sharper than usual, he was caught off guard. Well, answer your The sudden stop confused Travis. What happened to keep her from finishing? Travis, came his father's voice again. Travis. The mixture of a day filled with fear and confusion, along with his own fighting against the desire to flee, was causing a strange reaction inside the boy, and before he knew what he was doing, he groaned out the word "what" in a way he would only have used on an annoying friend relentlessly badgering him. Rapidly responding to the tone, Travis heard the sudden anger accompanying the already intimidating nature of his father's voice. Don't you dare! But almost as quickly as he started, the man trailed off. Travis heard a heavy intake of breath and its release before his father spoke again. Travis, where were you today? Why didn't you come home right away? The why, Travis thought. The where is too simple to be believed, and the why is too bizarre. He didn't know what he could say, especially waiting as long as he was to reply. There was just no way his parents would understand or believe. I was downtown. There was a long silence, and Travis knew they were waiting for more. He decided he could not tell them the truth. He just needed to make something up. He thought about turning around, but then the idea of facing his father stopped him cold. There was a girl. She was scared. Bullies or something. Wanted someone to walk her home. So I did. And that's all we got for now. I hope you enjoyed it.